A listener reached out after seeing the channel, said they originally posted this story on Reddit and asked me to cover it. Am I the a-hole for kicking out my wife after finding her diary? That is the question, and by the time you hear what was inside that book, you will understand why there was no version of this where she was staying in that house. It started in the garage. I was cleaning, moving things around, reorganizing shelves, pulling old boxes forward, when something fell from the top rack and landed behind the unit. I reached for it. I could not get to it, so I moved the rack. Behind it, pressed flat against the wall, and taped in place was a plastic bag. It startled me, not because it was threatening, just because someone had gone out of their way to hide it there, and that someone had to be my wife. I peeled the tape loose, opened the bag, and found a stack of old books, paperbacks mostly, nothing unusual. Then, at the bottom of the stack, a small book with a metal clasp on the cover. It looked like it had a lock on it. It did not. I opened it. The first few pages had no name on them, just handwriting I had never seen written that way before. I turned to the next page, then the next. By the fourth page, I knew exactly whose handwriting this was. My wife had written every single word. The early entries were from college, years before we ever met. She wrote about a threesome, not once, not as something she regretted, more than once, and she described it in detail, not with shame, with pride. I sat on the garage floor and kept reading. The entries moved forward in time. Her graduation, her first job, the city she moved to before we met. And then she wrote about the night we met. She wrote about me. She described our early months together in the same flat, detached tone she used for everything else, like she was taking inventory instead of falling in love. I read a version of our relationship I had never seen before. Our first trip together, our first real argument, the night I proposed. She wrote about all of it. The entry about my proposal was the one that stopped me the longest. She wrote about saying yes, wrote about how happy I looked, and then in the very next sentence, moved on to something else entirely, like it was just a thing that happened to her. The entries moved forward through our relationship, and somewhere in the middle of those pages, her handwriting started covering other men. We had dated for 2 years before we got married. She had been cheating on me for most of it. She wrote about men I had never heard of, wrote about what she did, where she went, how she felt. Then I hit an entry with a name I did recognize, a man I had known for years, someone who had been in our home, someone I had called a friend. She wrote about sleeping with him while we were still dating, wrote about the risk, wrote about how it made her feel. She was not conflicted. She was bragging. I turned the pages past our wedding date. We had been married 4 years. She had cheated on me 3 times during those 4 years, 3 different men, and every time the tone was the same. No guilt, no hesitation, just detailed accounts of what these men gave her, that she said she was not getting at home. She wrote about how they made her feel. She wrote things I will not repeat here. I sat there until the light in the garage changed. I do not know how long that was. Am I the a-hole for what I did when I finally stood up? Because here is what I did. I went inside, got my phone, and photographed every single page of that diary, every entry, every word she had written. Then I went back to the garage, put the diary back at the bottom of that bag, pressed the bag back against the wall, and reapplied the tape exactly as it had been, rack back in place, everything back exactly as it was. I went inside and said nothing. My wife came home that evening, made dinner, talked about her day, asked me how work went. I answered her. I sat with her and held a full conversation like nothing in the world had changed. Inside, something had gone stone cold quiet. Not rage, something far colder than that. 2 days later, I drove to my father's house. I told him what I found, showed him a few of the photos on my phone. He did not react the way I expected. He did not raise his voice. He asked me two questions. What are you going to do about this? And have you talked to an attorney yet? That was the entire conversation. No speech, no lecture. He told me to look at our finances, secure what I needed to secure, and say nothing to her until I had spoken to a lawyer. I drove home that night and did exactly what he said. I pulled up every joint account, every credit card, every bill we shared, and I documented all of it. The numbers were fine. She had not been pulling money out, had not been hiding accounts, but the picture I was building was thorough, and I wanted it that way. When this hit Reddit, the comments went to war over one specific question. Was I wrong for reading a diary that was not addressed to me? Here is my answer. I did not go looking for it. Something fell. I moved a rack, and what I found behind that rack was years of her life documented in her own handwriting, handed to me by accident. I called an attorney that week. 4 years of marriage, no children, a rental, joint accounts. He reviewed the photos of the diary, told me the entries established a documented pattern that showed she was unfaithful for most of the marriage. In our state, that carries weight when it comes to asset division, not as a criminal matter, but as evidence of bad faith with shared finances and shared trust. He told me to open a personal account, move a portion of my income over immediately, and document any joint expenses from that point forward. He also said, do not remove anything from the home, do not make any large purchases, and do not tip your hand until the paperwork is ready. He also told me she would not be entitled to alimony. 4 years, comparable incomes, no children. The math was not in her favor. I did everything he said. Then I waited. I watched her come home every evening. I watched her set her bag down, wash her hands, start asking what I wanted for dinner. I watched her laugh at shows we used to watch together. I watched her reach for my hand sometimes, and I let her, because saying nothing was still the right move. One evening, she asked me if everything was okay, said I seemed a little distant lately. I told her work had been heavy. She understood and said okay, and went back to her phone. That was the last real conversation we had. Then one night she was sitting on the couch, phone in hand, laughing at something on the screen, and something in me gave way. Not an explosion, a collapse. I told her she needed to leave. She looked up, asked me what I was talking about. I told her plainly, if she was not out of this house within the next few days, they would be burying one of us before the month was over. I never raised my hand. I never moved toward her. But she saw something in my face she had not seen before. She put the phone down without another word, went to the bedroom, and came back out with a bag. She left without asking questions. She just left. I went to my former friend's place a few days after that. I did not go inside. I did not yell. I stood at his front door and told him once, do not ever come near me again. He opened his mouth to say something. I turned and walked back to my car. She was served with divorce papers at her office 2 weeks later. The process server told my attorney she stood there in a daze looking at them for a long time before going back inside. She called my number once. I changed my number after that phone call. The divorce moved quickly. No children, minimal shared assets, short marriage. She received nothing beyond her personal belongings and her car. No alimony. The attorney was right about that. I got my name off the lease and found a place of my own. About 2 months after the divorce was final, I heard through someone we both knew that she had been trying to reach me. She wanted to explain. There was nothing to explain. She had already explained everything years ago in her own handwriting, in a book she thought no one would ever find. I never responded. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole for kicking her out after finding that diary? She documented it herself. She was proud of every word she wrote.